And then I'll share that link with you to the meeting when we're done, because it'll save to my computer. All right, well, I guess I will go ahead and get started and say welcome, everybody. Good to see you all. It's been a while since we've seen you. And hope everybody is doing all right. Steve had just sent out the agenda for today, and I guess I will put that up on my screen. So give me just a second. Let's see, can you see my screen? Can you see the agenda?
Yeah, we can see it fine.
All right, perfect. So I am looking just through the participants, and if we can make sure we've got a roll call here. I see Brent Collier, I see Steve Rumrill, Claire Thomas, I see Mitch, Steve Williams, Shane Riley, Tony DeAndrea, and let's see, who else is there? Sean is there. It looks like maybe Tony DeAndrea, and I've got a couple other folks from Secor or other names that I don't recognize. Barbara Trout was on a moment ago. Barbara, are you still there?
I am.
Okay, great. So who have I missed, just so that we could do a roll call for the meeting attendees?
Well, there's Craig also there, Craig Andes.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I guess I'm going to turn over the agenda to Steve Rumrill.
All right, well, thanks everyone. Thanks for coming to meeting here. So for this meeting, we were anticipating right up till yesterday that we would meet in person in Garibaldi. And I was really looking forward to that. We've all talked about that, having an opportunity to get together and meet each other face to face. So we had set the agenda. We had set 2 minutes or so per person of the Tibcock members to just say a few words about themselves and why you're interested again, and remind ourselves why we're here working hard to develop these recommendations. I still think that's a good idea, just to kind of recharge that. So that's what we've allocated. Our first half an hour was to go over that, just the welcome that Christy completed and restatement of interest in Tibcock. So I'd like to just start by saying that on behalf of the Shellfish program, I'm Steve Rumrill, leader for the Shellfish program for the Marine Resource program here for ODFW. But I want to just say that I'm really keenly interested in hearing, discussing, chewing on, debating these proposed recommendations to improve overall management of our bay clam fisheries in Tillamook Bay. I genuinely appreciate the opportunity to meet with you all. I think our Tibcock group represents a good diversity and a small functional work group. It's very impressive, the work that you've done over the past couple of years. Hats off to Christy for pulling that together into this draft interim recommendation report. So, it's my job to work with my team then to take these recommendations that you've developed so far, pull them together into a report to the leadership of ODFW. I'm charged by law with reporting on your status, the status of your report before the end of this year. So I want to thank you again for all the good work you put in. Looking forward to working with you on our extended time period over the next year or so to develop the full report. But thanks very much. You're helping me do my job. So thanks a lot. Christy, I don't know how you want to run through roll call and just offer people a chance to reintroduce themselves and just make a quick statement.
Sure. With my agenda up, I can't see everybody. So how about I'll go next, and then I'll call on Steve Williams, and then Steve, if you can call on the next person, does that work all right?
There you go.
Been through everybody?
Yeah.
All right.
Work. So, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first.
Okay.
So I'm Christy Foster. I'm the executive director at Tillamook Estuaries Partnership, and I was invited to be on this team to represent folks from an environmental perspective. And part of our charge is really just the health and well-being of all 5 estuaries in Tillamook County. So anything that we can do to be a part of the sustainable enjoyment and use of our natural resources is really our focus. And we are very interested in habitat, in wildlife, in water quality, and all of those things apply here. So we also do community engagement and education. So I'm coming from that background. I'm not personally a clammer, so this is a new industry to me, and I've really enjoyed learning more about it. And I'm very happy with the way the team has been working together because we do have a great diversity of experience and backgrounds and interests. And putting together the draft report made me see how much work we've done to date. And so I'm really happy about that. And I will turn it over to Steve Williams.
Thank you, Christy. Yeah, my name is Steve Williams. My interest in the advisory committee comes from my many years of being a shellfish harvester, if you will, on Tillamook Bay, both clams and crab and darn near anything you can harvest in Tillamook Bay. I grew up in Tillamook, and so I've spent a lot of time here on the bay. My interest in participating was to hopefully assist the department in being able to maintain a robust recreational fishery, while at the same time be able to support a commercial fishery that harvests at levels that are consistent with some of the stock biomass estimates that ODFW has available. So it's trying to come up with, in my mind, a balance that let there be a good recreational fishery and a meaningful and sustainable commercial fishery consistent with biological values and information that ODFW is able to supply us. And I think we can do that. It's a matter of working together as we have so far already. I think we've made some good headway. We got some work ahead of us, but I'm looking forward to continuing. And I was sure looking forward today to get to see everybody in person, but it didn't happen that way. So we'll hopefully at maybe our next meeting be able to accomplish that. And so I guess I'll conclude there and go on to Brent.
Well, greetings, folks. I'm Brent Collier. I represent the sports side of things. I'm very pleased with how the process has moved along, and it looks like we're moving forward rather nicely. One of the things I just wanted to say was I would not have been able to attend the meeting today in person. Wish I could have, but I've got a knee replacement in my immediate future, and so it's a little tough for me to get around right now. Thank you.
Just next on my screen is Claire.
Yeah, so I'm Claire Thomas. I represent the environmental side of things from having been part of the watershed councils and education throughout the county, and also am president of the GCHI, which runs the boathouse, which is where most of the clamming takes place, recreational clamming takes place. And we also have some citizen science projects out there that look at numbers of takes that people have and sizes of clams and stuff like that that's being taken out there. Anyway, so I have a high interest in that, and of course in sustainability of clams in this bay as well as in meat tarts and other places. So clam harvest, and so that's my interest. And I need to go back and see who's after me, I guess, on this list. I don't know who is after me. I can't tell who's next, Christy.
Okay, next on my screen is Barbara Trout.
Yes, I'm on the recreational side, and I worked in Salem at the legislature and worked with the legislators and ODFW putting this Senate Bill 1025 together. I'm a recreational clammer, and many of my friends are recreational clammers and had noticed what they perceived to be a decline in the clam stocks out on the sandbars. And we wanted to make sure that clam surveys were done so we could accurately assess, you know, what was actually happening to the clam population. So I think that's all I have. Next.
Thank you. Shane is next on my screen. And Shane, you're not me. We're not hearing you. Nope, not yet. You might have to try, if you can't quite get it working, maybe you can log out and come back in. And while we're waiting, Craig, you are next on my list. So how about if you go next while Shane works on his audio?
My name's Craig Andes. I'm more on the side of the sustainability of harvest in the bay for commercial and sport and everybody. There's management things that have been working, and there's some that don't, and I want to see those all streamlined and surveys done so that we have the proper data and our proper quota amounts. And there's a lot of things that could be changed up as far as how the fishery operates for sustainability than as it is managed right now. But yeah, long story short, I run a commercial dive operation in the bay, and I have a lot of understanding of the biology and what's going on in there, and that's why I'm on the board.
Can anyone hear me now?
Yes, we can now. Thank
Okay,
you.
cool, perfect. I'm Shane, always on the commercial side. I've been a permit holder since 2014, been doing it since 2010, and being this is my livelihood would pretty much be one of the main reasons that I have interest in, you know, this committee and everything. So that's about it.
Thank you. Tony, you next on my screen. Tony, if you are talking, you are on mute.
No, I didn't quite hear you, Christy. But so my name's Tony D'Andrea. I am one of Steve's staff in the ODFW Shellfish program. I run the Shellfish and Estuarine Assessment of Coastal Oregon, or Secor project, which has a mandate to survey Oregon estuaries for estuarine habitat and bay clam populations. And so my primary role here from the ODFW side is provide information to the committee to help with them to make their recommendations to ODFW.
Thank you. And I have next on my screen, Levi Cherry.
Hello. I'm just here to observe and watch the meeting, but I'm owner of Oregon Coast Clam Company. We have a couple of the dive boats that operate in Tillamook Bay, and just watch and see what the results are of the meeting. So thank you.
Great, thanks. Welcome, Levi. And then I have one last person that says ODFW Secor.
Hello, everyone. I don't know if you can see us. We can't see ourselves. I'm Mo Bancroft. This is Emma Chesley. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm Summer Henriksen.
And we're part of the Secor team. We have 5 more of us, but just wanted to make some FaceTime today and say hello and listen in.
Great, thank you. I don't see anybody else that is on the call. So if I missed anybody, please speak up. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Steve. Should I? And I'll pop up.
Mitch Vance is also with us.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mitch. Yeah.
Yep. Right here, Mitch Vance with the Shellfish program, ODFW in Newport. And yeah, also very happy with the progress we've made so far and looking forward to getting these recommendations put down on pen and submitted. Thanks, everyone.
I couldn't find my unmute button. So we've got the agenda here. And Steve Rumrill, I'll turn this back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Christy. So regarding our agenda, again, thanks for restating interest and who you are. I think that's very nice for us to just again appreciate the diversity of the different perspectives here as well. And I want to say thank you to the committee for allowing our Secor team, our field team, to listen in. They're up working in Tillamook Bay right now and pulled themselves out of the field and are gathered. I'm not sure where you are, Mo and Summer and Emma, but I saw it looks like a bookcase or something in the back. So thanks for joining us out of the field today. Regarding our agenda for today, so what we would like to do is to provide a very brief update regarding the commercial bay clam fisheries, kind of status for what has occurred in 2022. And Mitch Vance will do that from our program. And we're going to scoot that down and ask Tony to provide us with a summary of progress today, up to today, from our Secor field surveys in Tillamook Bay. And Tony has some PowerPoint images, maps and such that he'll be able to share with us. Mitch, do you have any graphics for the update on commercial bay clam fisheries?
No, Steve, I did not prepare any graphics. I just do indeed have the numbers if you want me to go through those.
Yeah, so we'll do that. Then we'll pass to Tony. He'll provide some slides and such. And then around 1 o'clock or so, we'd like to spend the bulk of the time this meeting reviewing your draft Tibcock interim summary report. So again, Christy has worked with all the information that we've been able to generate, provide, and generated a report. So we'll spend time going over that report. So Christy will lead that. And then around 2 o'clock, as we get towards the end of the meeting, we'd like to spend some time identifying the topics for our next meeting. And that'll give us our marching orders to pull that information together and get it out to you in a manner that you can digest it and we can have a good productive meeting number 10. And then finally, we'll finish off by just talking about the timeline for delivery of this interim summary report. Right now, we're at the draft mode. And so information and feedback and comments that are generated today will go into revision of that report. But anyway, so we're going to need to get that, that interim report to ODFW because myself and my team will need a bit of time to develop our report based on that and then get on the agenda for delivery of that to the Oregon legislators before the end of the year. And with that, then we have a little bit longer time, but hope to adjourn by sometime between 2:15 and 2:30. So that's what we got for agenda. Any comments on the agenda before we get started on it? Okay, so with that, then I think I'll pass this to Mitch. And Mitch, if you can provide us with that update on the commercial bay clam fisheries for this season.
Yeah, you bet. Excuse me. The commercial clam fisheries up in Tillamook Bay are moving right along as expected. We did reach the quota, the 80,000 pound quota for the raked cockles, and that was closed on May 21st. Went a little bit over. The last 3 or 4 or 5 days all showed multiple thousands of pounds landed, with the last day on the 20th being 8,000 pounds. So that was a big low tide, and that went right along. And then refocused on the dive cockles. We reached that 185,000 pound quota on, well, actually hit it on the 18th, and that closed on June 22nd. Went a little bit over there also, but not drastically. The dive butter fishery is marching right along. Currently, 151,000 pounds of butters have been landed from Tillamook Bay from the divers. And that's probably going to continue for another few weeks, depends on the focus up there. And I do know that that focus is going to shift starting tomorrow with the opening of the dive gaper clam fishery. So that's going to proceed. We'll see how long that takes. My guess is only a couple of weeks based on past years. And on another note, there is still some quota left, or quite a bit of quota left on the knee tarts intertidal cockle fishery. Only about 3,000 pounds have been harvested from knee tarts Bay. So that is an option for cockles also. So that is the basics there. Any questions about that?
Mitch, can I ask quick, said we went over a bit on the dive cockles. How far over?
I see a total of 189,000 pounds landed, so 4,000 pounds over.
All right, so good job, everybody, in terms of providing that information into Mitch. Mitch uses that to forecast, plan ahead with the uncertainties of tides and weather and harvest and effort and all of that, the information that we had available. So collectively, that looks like a good job. They hit 189,000 when we were trying for 185,000. So collectively, thanks for doing a good job.
Mitch, just one question. This is Steve. You probably said it and I missed it. I was writing. You said knee tarts has still got some quota available. Remind me again what the knee tarts intertidal cockle number is.
Yeah, the total available in knee tarts Bay is 22,000 pounds. Okay. And only 3,000 has been landed. And I've got many reports. If you guys have gone down there and tried, it's just not Tillamook Bay. It's a little bit harder work. The size grade is not as large, but we will see if that effort shift happens and they get those.
So I got a couple questions. So because of the derby on cockles, which is the quota being put in and implemented the way it was, cutting it off like it was with an 8,000 pound day right at the end. And I haven't seen anybody out there on the flats except for one boat when I drove by today. Even at these low tides, there's been very few sport people actually, going and bothering to go out there. Being that was a temporary rule put in that was only supposed to be for last year, according to some of the people I talked to in ODF&W about how temporary rules work, because we were supposed to, I thought, have a conversation on that rule before it was re-implemented this year, as I recall from our earlier meetings. But it would imply that there was no shortage of clams out there towards the end, and that there still isn't. And I'm sure Tony and his team could probably have those figures for us, because they've been out there surveying the island. And that's just the one front island that is got the most contention about it, that most of the majority of all those clams came off of and come across there in a conveyor like method. So now there's a lot of people out of work, no way for people to get to make a living that have invested in the fishery for years and are used to being able to go out in some periods of time all year and getting clams because of I think a very misdirected decision by ODF&W to put a quota on it instead of individual quotas or some sort of a limit on how many people that are buying the clam licenses to get into the fishery. And the same goes with the dive fishery. There's permits being transferred onto boats, that new boats, and not necessarily the proper transfer paperwork were done on one last year in particular. And then of course it's hard when you even want to get your own transfer done on something that you've done many times in the past. But it just seems like there's not much of it's all a downhill slope for the commercial guys on this board, and in general in the eyes of the way ODF&W is managing the fishery. there's been plenty of reports done and stuff about sustainability that seems to have been ignored, and almost the playbook of sustainability was used as almost an opposite policy standard with what's going on now, which, you know, seems to be the word agenda a lot, that I don't think that me and Shane and the people that are involved on the commercial side have had much say in at all. There's a lot of this kind of pre-planned narrative for this whole group, and I honestly just don't want to be a commercial fisherman on it that's kind of strung along. And then it's okay because we had commercial fishermen on this board and we really didn't have a real say in it. And I think Shane and the Rakers and a lot of other people would agree that's on our side of things, of the fence, including some people that are on the other side that are more about sustainability, you know, of everybody involved. And that includes the sport people, the conflict, all the other things that go on out there. Haven't really been addressed by this board properly as far as I see. And so I don't know what, there's a lot to be said to that, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of clams out there right now on those flats, especially in other parts of the bay, where there could be people out doing a sustainable fishery and they're not. And all you did is create a huge conflict, again, by putting in a commercial quota dive fishery, derby fishery on raking, which was something that we were asking be changed from day one with our dive quota fisheries. And here it was managed again the same way, to where everybody starts having to butt heads out there for the first 3 months of the year, potentially take a whole lot of clams out of there as fast as we can so that Tony and those guys go out there and survey it, and it looks bad when they actually get to go out there. See, I see there's some management non-transparency issues going on in this all. And so that being said, I'm going to just see how these meetings go, and I might step down from my position here and hand it off to Levi or somebody else that's in this industry, because I don't have time for this. I need to be out working tomorrow, and I can't be because my permit's not being transferred. A 3-page piece of documentation when I asked for it within a couple of days can't be done in an ODF&W office, because it seems that there's just, you know, a lack of management problems and actually wanting to do stuff for people that they're serving. So thank you. Let me mute myself.
Craig,
Well, we have you on the committee here, Craig, and that's what this committee is for, is to develop recommendations. And so if you have other management ideas, then we need to get those on this report.
We've discussed that for years, Mitch. Me and you, Justin Ainsworth, we just tried to discuss some of those things in the early part of this meeting, but it became, you know, a different agenda than what we'd asked for, or we talked about from time to time. Every meeting we'd come back to the next one. Those things that we were asked about, Shane, the other people on our side, were just kind of stepped over with another agenda, mandatory fish tickets, stuff that had nothing to do with the 1029 bill. There's been so much stuff on this agenda that has got nothing to do with the original raking 1029 bill, including the ghost hole conflict that we spent a whole year on. So I don't see that it's not a time for excuses anymore. It's time for action.
Well, the bill was written to form this committee and develop the recommendations, not to change management actions during this time.
Then what's the raking quota?
It is
management is a management decision because we did not have the data from Secor. That was the money was there for, and COVID shut it down, yet there was still other surveys being done with that money that wasn't in Tillamook Bay. So there was really no excuse for that, for not having some management information to make those decisions, even based on past surveys that were done in the Bay and understandings of things. There's more clams out there, and gaper clams and biomass in some areas, and other ones. We need to have a survey. We need to know what we're even talking about here. Barber trout said that many times. a lot of people have said the same thing at these meetings. We don't have the data to even have these meetings to know what we're even like trying to put in policy for.
Well, they're getting it now. Tony's
I know
going to
they
talk
are.
about that in just a minute.
I know they are. But that's just it. We shouldn't be making those shut down the raking quota decisions and stuff like that on this board, or temporary rules when there's not an emergency going on. It's obvious if there was 8,000 pounds landed the last day. I don't see a biological reason for it. I don't see a biological reason to make a derby out of it to cause people to have more problems out there and have more conflict. Because that's just long-term, create a conflict, have problems with the fishery, be able to study why it was, it didn't work out later on for the next 30 years and get grants, like have people like, what's going on right now with the survey. I said years and years ago and talked with Justin about how this bay was sustainable, and none of that was ever listened to even back then. Everything seems like it was done in opposite of what I suggested even. So, and that's the way it feels and seems and looks, and the data's there.
Christy, I'd make a suggestion that we go ahead and move forward with Mr. Andrea's report, so we've started to gather some information here.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for your comments, Craig. And I hear you. We're trying to move forward as fast as the committee can, given all of the restrictions that we've had. But we'll open it up to Tony now.
Thanks, Christy. I'm not sure whether you have to give me permission to share screen.
Yeah, I did. I made you a co-host, so you should be able to.
Okay, let me know if you can see my slide there. Excellent. Okay. Well, good afternoon. The Secor survey of intertidal regions of Tillamook Bay started in late April, and I wanted to take a little bit of time to give an update on the status of the survey to the committee. So the plan for 2022 is to complete the major intertidal areas in the northern portion of the bay. This area includes the major sport clamming flat in Garibaldi, middle flat located just across from the Coast Guard station, and the northern portion of the Bay Ocean tide flat, just north of where most of the oyster aquaculture leases occur on this tide flat. In 2023, we plan to complete the remaining intertidal areas and conduct the subtidal dive survey for clam populations in the deeper channels of the bay. I wanted to briefly review the types of samples we're collecting in the survey. First, we have rapid assessment sampling, a RAM that is designed to provide habitat and presence of clams over broad areas of the estuary. So we collect habitat information such as sediment type and vegetation. So things like cobble, sand, mud, eelgrass, macroalgae. We also count burrow shows of clams and rake the surface for cockles and little necks. This gives us information on where in the bay the various clam species are found. The map here shows the grid pattern we're using for the current survey. On most of the intertidal areas, we have samples in a 100 by 100 meter grid pattern. And we do have one exception to this up in the Garibaldi flat area, since it's a much smaller area. The grid pattern here for these samples is a 30 by 30 meter grid. The second type of samples we collect are done using our detailed assessment method, or DAM. These sites are random locations on each of the tide flats with the total number of sites scaled to the total area of that intertidal flat. Within each of these intertidal regions, sites are stratified by 4 tide levels from about negative 0.5 meters to plus 3 meters relative to mean low, lower water. This permits us to identify the tide heights where various species can be found. At each site, we collect the same type of habitat data that was described for the RAM grid sites. The main difference here is that we also extract all the clams to a depth of 35 centimeters, which is about 1.2 feet into the sediment. And so these clam data are the ones used by the Shellfish program to produce information about the clam populations in these regions. And so there are over 600 of these random sites planned for the intertidal portion of the Secor survey. So the map here shows the planned habitat grid sites, the white circles, and the random sites for clam populations in yellow. We're focusing on the northern intertidal regions of the bay for several reasons. First, during the previous Secor survey, over 85% of the cockle population in the intertidal and over 95% of the gaper clam population and all of the butter and little neck clams were found in this region of the intertidal. This is also the region of the bay where much of the recreational and commercial intertidal harvest is focused. So it's important to include these regions in the early portions of the survey. And to some degree, we're also limited this year because the number of good low tide series are lower than we're used to having. And they're essential for these intertidal surveys. And so it was unlikely that we could cover all of the planned intertidal regions. So the decision was made to ensure that these important regions were completed. So where are we at? So the map here overlays our completed RAM grid habitat sites, which are indicated by the red squares. So most of the effort to date has been on the Garibaldi and Middle Flat regions, which are almost complete. The next map here includes the completed RAM grid sites, but also includes the random sites where we have completed the habitat data collection. And so these are the blue squares on the maps. Again, we've made significant progress on 2 of the 3 tide flats for these samples. And finally, this map shows the random sites where we've also completed the clam population sampling, which is indicated by the light blue crosses overlaying on the blue squares. We have made the most progress on Garibaldi Flat to date, but a sampling priority during the next month with the poor low tide series will be to continue megacore sampling on Middle Flat. The field teams just started sampling Bay Ocean North this morning, and I haven't had a chance to look at their progress to that, but this tide flat region will be the major focus of our remaining low tide work through September. So kind of in summary, Secor's on schedule to complete a major portion of the intertidal regions of the bay when our field season ends in October. The results will be summarized in a year-1 progress report that will be available in the fall. I wanted to kind of finish up by giving just a quick overview of what we've been seeing in the clam population samples we've collected so far. So for Garibaldi Flat, the most abundant clam here, especially in the gravel cobble areas, are butter clams. We also found all the other major recreational clams at this location, and something we did not find in the previous survey, but we did find some non-native manila little necks intermixed with our native little necks on Garibaldi this year. And we also found evidence of a major gaper clam recruitment event in the last year with high densities of young of the year gapers found on at least 1 site. For Middle Flat, cockles and gaper clams are the major clams found to date and are what we would expect to find on this tide flat. We can't say much more about the populations here since we still have about 60% of the samples on the tide flat left to sample before we can say anything generally about this tide flat. So I just wanted to thank you for your time this afternoon. And we have a few minutes to answer any questions from the committee. I'll take any questions about the design and operations of Secor, and Steve will address any questions regarding priorities, personnel, or funding.
All right, thanks, Tony. Thanks for that. It's nice to see how you guys have progressed so far, and and this early information about what it is that you're seeing. Do you anticipate being able to finish this off by October, into October?
I do. We're being very strategic for the remaining good low tide series to ensure that we can get all the habitat and other data we need set in order for us to be able to do the population surveys. And then definitely for those last couple of months, the whole focus will be getting all of the clam population data.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's good timing as we approach, that transition from summer into fall to be able to have some numbers for these stock estimates then for these areas.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see Steve Williams has his hand up.
Thank you, Christy. Tony, one question. We heard earlier from Mitch's presentation that we have completed or gone through the cockle intertidal survey. How do you, with your assessment methodology, how do you account for or compensate or whatever the right term is when you have large removals from the very area you are sampling? How do you account for that, or how do you take that into account as you try to develop your estimates and your densities?
They aren't accounted for explicitly in the estimates. The estimates are what they are. They're the estimates of what we find when we conduct the survey. And the Secor survey isn't necessarily in the exact locations where the harvest takes place. And so we're just trying to get the snapshots of what the overall population in that intertidal region and across all the regions are for the bay.
Okay, so would you call them, given that there were 80,000 pounds of cockles removed, I'm assuming Middle Flat was one of the major areas that occurred. Is it fair to say that the estimates you'll have would be minimums? Or, I'm just trying to figure out how we account for those when we look at your numbers, because 80,000 pounds is a lot of cockles coming from an area that you're trying to sample. I guess I'm not really sure what my question is. I'm just trying to figure out how we account for that as we're working our way.
I think, Steve, the way to kind of think about it when you look at the numbers is that what we're going to be producing is going to be, conservative estimates of what the population is, not necessarily accounting for that. So it'll be our best estimate after that has already been.
Okay. Well, that was my assumption. I appreciate you saying it, because that way then it puts it in context what we're looking at.
But can I say something? Isn't the survey done about the same time each year? So it would already have that withdrawal of the harvest during that first 3 months?
Yes, Barbara. It's pretty much the same timing for the surveys when they're conducted.
But Tony, you started your surveys in those areas when?
In April and May.
Okay, so they're kind of going on simultaneously.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So there was clams harvested, prior to you being out doing the survey, and they do continue to, roll across those flats and spread out on those islands, behind there. Obviously the 80,000 pounds came off of there. You got to add that back to whatever your survey is across the general whole flat. The majority of it does come off of that front island or the second island behind it. A little bit comes off the west island, but most all the effort that I saw this year by the commercial guys was on the flat that's, across there from the Coast Guard station.
Yep, that's where we usually see most of the effort.
And so have you seen, since the quota was shut down, what kind of whether not necessarily looking at numbers, but from what you see out there, does did you see an increase in the amount of clams drastically within a few tides in some areas? Or, but you're not going back and restamping the same areas. So if you don't have kind of a pre understanding of what's going on there before it's raked and or even going back, because it changes so much all the time, if you don't continue to take a sample off the same area grid, then it's kind of hard to tell what's going on out there, would be my assessment, from as much as I raked clams in the past, because things change all the time, where they settle up and everything. So if just doing one sample grid out there and putting a little, you can't put a little stake in the ground and have a buoy tied to it for a week before you do your sample there, because it affects the ground there. It's not the same thing having a buoy swing around with the moss on it and act like a windshield wiper to where the clams would settle. That's something I've experienced looking at the survey in the past, at least the 2010 survey. That you need to be able to go out there with the GPS. Maybe you're doing this now, but go out there with the GPS and mark your spots and survey it. But having another foreign body of a survey marker there drastically affects the sand flat around it. It's like no different than digging a hole and leaving it. So I just, are you going out and picking up or throwing down a GPS survey, or are you still doing I haven't been out there since you started the survey, so I don't know whether you're using the little buoys or not, but it was something I just saw as a major, and I documented in the 2010 survey photographs and video of what I'm talking about. I talked to Nate about it, who said, I'm sure talked to you about it a little bit too. But are you just taking GPS numbers when you do your throwdown grids, or are you doing them around where a marker was?
Craig, we still use those buoys. The main navigation to take the initial data is just via GPS. But the buoys are used for staff to be able to navigate the boat to the locations where that data was collected.
And are you collecting that data directly around the square spot of that buoy, or is that buoy just a place where you park the boat and then get out and you're 10 feet from where that buoy is? Because I can show you a whole bunch of documentation I have of the buoys literally acting like a windshield wiper out there with a giant ball of kelp or moss spinning around in the tide and creating an hourglass shape towards your guys's buoys, and literally washing your buoys out and floating them away, because they would just self-dig themselves out with the rope. And there's no way any clams are going to stay settled in that. Or that there's just no way you can get an accurate natural survey of the ground there. It's like skews it. It just show that there's no clams there all the time, because trust me, there was never any clams around those when I looked at your survey markers in 2010. And it just, that's just that can't be. I mean, I don't know. That just doesn't work though, to have a foreign object where things are for like a week before you go take a survey there. I'm just saying. Done a few surveys of my own of types.
Can I, Steve Rumrow here, can I remind everybody that in the recommendations, draft recommendations so far, we have this statement to incorporate data from the commercial fleet, size, distribution of harvested clams, the rates of repopulation, if possible, conduct surveys earlier in the calendar year before commercial harvesting efforts begin. Alternately, incorporate commercial harvest data into the survey data to develop more complete population estimates. Those are recommendations that the committee has already put forward and are in the report. So it sounds like we're touching back on those and re-emphasizing that those are good ideas, and you've captured them in your report here already, which is good.
I think it's important that the data that we collect is considered valid data for study and stuff. I mean, we have to keep everything on the up and up. So, yeah. It's good data. It's a lot of effort to even, for us to keep track of all that and write it down and all that. So
If you guys don't mind, if I chime in here real quick, it's Levi Cherry here. So I have a lot of guys who go out there and rake, and my questions on your data points for the Secor and whatnot is I have guys that'll go out there and they'll do what they consider a farm raking, and they will sit in one spot and they will dig every clam out of that spot, and they will go back there day after day, and they'll move over 20, 40, 50, 100 feet and get every cockle out of that spot for their 300 to 400 pounds of the day. What happens if one of your guys' data points lands on one of those spots and all of a sudden you guys go in there and there's no cockles in that ground? How are you guys gonna, what's the adjustment gonna be for that? Because I do see it. I see what everything I see on your guys' data points is exceptional, except for the 80,000 pounds being removed out of pretty much, I would say 60% of that 80,000 pounds is removed from that northern portion of the Big Island there on the North Island. So that's a lot when you're trying to calculate in off of all these key data points that you guys have, the GPS points. That 80,000 pounds, if that was placed there and you guys had the data with that 80,000 pounds or 40, 50,000 pounds that was on that, how much is that going to adjust your guys' numbers for actually what a true population estimate is going to be and for the carryover into that? So I do see where Craig is coming from with it. Yeah, I mean, you guys having your topics as to how to be able to adjust for that. I don't see how you guys can have a survey without an adjustment for it, because and saying that we've harvested this amount, we just started harvesting the big amounts here in the last 4 or 5 years, over 90,000 pounds. If you look back 10 years and 15 years as the harvest amounts, they're not like what we're doing right now. Those were harvest amounts that took the whole year, 90,000 pounds that took all the tides throughout the year. So I just see that there is a place for error right now on these estimates without considering that 80,000 pounds.
Yeah, thanks, Levi. Steve here. And that's why we've specifically discussed earlier in these meetings that it would be helpful to have information contributed by the commercial harvesters here to determine what those rates of repopulation are at specific sites. Tony's team does not have that capability in the sampling plan to go back and resample sites to develop that rate of repopulation. But the way that you guys are doing your commercial harvesting, you do have those records. And that'd be very valuable to overall management of the fishery to have that understanding that we're talking about here. So that's why this committee has discussed that, and that's part of the recommendation is to work with you all to be able to get that information in and figure out some way to incorporate it into the overall stock estimate. So yeah, thanks for that point, re-emphasizing that point.
So this is Christy, and I'd like to say that perhaps when we get through to the interim draft of our interim report, the draft of it, if there are some very specific things that that Craig you'd like to have added to what we're recommending, we can certainly do that. I just took my first draft of it and I put in some things that I thought that I heard us talk about, but if there's something more specific, we can add that to the recommendations. Does anybody else have any other questions for Tony? And if so, then Tony, maybe you could stop sharing your screen. There you go. Anybody else have questions for Tony?
I have a question. It's Claire. On the gaper clams, you talked about one, I think it was a year, this year, much greater than last year or something like that, a 1-year recruitment. And I was wondering, if you haven't been there for 10 years, how did you measure that? Was it based on the size of the gapers or what? How did you measure that? That they were recruited within 1 year, a greater increase this year than last year?
Yeah, Claire, it was based on the size of the gapers in the sample. And also the sheer fact that there were a very large density of them in that particular sample. so we can take at least an estimate of what the age of that those gapers that we saw were there, and they were likely like 1+ age gaper clams.
Okay, I had another question too, and that was I remember at the last meeting we had a discussion of dive the channel out there over the bar and the clams in the bar, and I don't think that's on your survey. There was comments made out there by the dive fishery and by you guys that there wasn't much out there, and by them that there was a lot out there, and I didn't know if that was going to be included in your survey this time or not, or what. It didn't look like it's in there.
Yeah, well, those were more, those weren't the final dive survey areas. They were actually the dive survey from 2012. So the last dive survey, just to represent kind of the areas that would likely be included. It's unlikely that we'll be working basically between the jaws, just from a logistics and safety perspective. In working in that main channel is not safe. For our dive operations. So it's unlikely that that will be included, in particular because we do have to focus on areas that we know the commercial fishery is actively harvesting to ensure that we have the best available data for that region. And so there'll only be some smaller areas that we'll be able to also incorporate into that dive survey.
Okay, so if
I got it. Can I make a point that when you guys do those surveys in the areas that we dive and you don't, where in the channels that are more dangerous and where we don't generally dive, obviously, and I know there's a lot of clams in those areas that we don't dive, is that going to be taken into consideration as a part of the biomass? Some areas of those areas obviously should have some sort of a test done during some certain, where you can do it tide window, so that you do have an idea that those areas are heavily populated, but those are acting as, a safety net for, against harvest. And by working in the areas that we work, it's going to give you an overall understanding of kind of the biology of the bay where we work at, as opposed to the overall, biology of the bay, because of the fact that some areas that you don't go for certain reasons, like the entire lengths of the jetties where there's a lot of biomass along and out into the ocean and clear, I know there's cockle beds all the way up to, Brighton, and then a bunch of different holes in the coast out there. I had another really good something I thought you would be able to be good. I'll think of it in a minute. Sorry.
Well, just for me to continue then with my thought is, it seems like where the dive fishery occurs and where it's happening and where we're talking about expanding or not expanding, if that becomes a possibility, which apparently it wasn't with the ghost hole, and I'm hoping that was just a thing for this season. I'm hoping our recommendations do have the ability to change things if it seems appropriate. Locations of dive takes and things, or raking, or whatever we're talking about, that it won't just be shut down and stated that that Fish and Wildlife doesn't do that, so we won't be doing that, even though it's a recommendation. Because I kind of felt that happened at the ghost hole. I know I already talked about this earlier, but it seems like it's really important on the setting quotas for the fisheries, the dive fisheries, commercial fisheries, to know what's happening within their sites that we have opened up for them, and not across the whole bay. So the whole bay is really important, but their sites almost need to be teased out and looked at in more detail to know what is happening with recruitment within those sites. Anyway.
I agree with that. That's kind of what I was talking about too, as far as the areas that we don't get into, that we don't harvest, as opposed to the areas we harvest. Yeah. The other thing will be hard for you guys to discern from our records is this year, the whole harvest has taken kind of a shift in effort, and instead of just focusing on cockles this year, everybody's focused on butters, cockles, and gaper bycatch on the butters. And so the numbers this year don't look like the cockles were necessarily good because of nobody had necessarily a focused, effort on it, and stuff like that's going to be kind of hard from studying the records of us because of the changes that we make in our own industry, depending on market demand and how we're, maybe competing with each other because of the quotas. But that being said, that's going to be something that's going to play a big factor in how those numbers look when they come in from the commercial fisheries side of, taking data points from.
Okay, any other questions for Tony? All right, the next thing on our agenda then is to review the draft of our interim report. So I'm going to put that on my share screen here. I guess I should ask everybody, everybody feeling okay? Anybody need to take a 5-minute bio break? We've been at it for an hour already. Okay, not hearing that anybody wants to take a break, then what we were hoping to do is we were hoping to get everybody's input on these summary of recommendations. We'd like to get this report out to the ODFW, hopefully by the end of July. That gives them time to turn it around. So our objective is to summarize the recommendations we've come up with for ODFW. So again, we are not able to make these changes. We are just recommending to ODFW what we think should happen. And so I put this together based on a shellfish report that Steve was able to send to me that had been submitted before. And so that is the rationale for the format. I went back through and I listened to quite a few of our meetings that had been recorded, went through all the meeting minutes, and I took my first stab at trying to get this all summarized for what we did. So far, I've met with Steve Williams, Steve Rummerl, and Mitch to kind of go over it. So I've incorporated some of their comments. And I was hoping that everybody else could then give their comments. I'm not a fast typer, so I won't be able to change this on the fly. But if you have things that you want to add or change or delete, then we can go ahead and try to start doing that. And I would ask you to send me your drafts and I can compile them all again. Steve Rummerl, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
Yes, I'd like to add just a little bit bigger picture. Christy, you're, of course, getting right to the guts of the recommendations, but I want to say on behalf of the Shellfish program, thanks a lot for all the great work that you did. Overall, the report contains, of course, more than just the recommendations. You've done a great job, and it's what I view as a close to complete interim report. But it also makes those good points that the committee was formed. We solicited nominations, and members have attended. We've held the meetings. We've held a good discussion. The committee has identified a whole series of topics and ranked those in terms of the priorities for discussion. In our series of meetings over the last couple of years, we've addressed about 2/3 of those topics. And in my perspective, we got about 1/3 of the way to go to address those topics that we have not had in-depth discussion so far. You've developed the draft recommendations to date, which Christy was focusing you on right immediately. But you've also obtained a time extension, bought yourself some more time to discuss those remaining thirds. We've dealt with constraints of the pandemic, and so bought a little bit more time while the Secor team is working out in the field to develop the new stock estimates. So we should have those to work with. That's also good. And so we're moving ahead. So thanks very much. From just the overall scope of the report contains more than just the recommendations. So good job there. I don't know if you want to talk about any of those things but the guts of it is making sure everybody's comfortable with the recommendations themselves. So thanks, Christy.
You're welcome. Yeah, as we go through this, please feel free. I'm perfectly fine with you telling me you don't like the way I wrote something. I won't take offense at all, and I'll do my best to get this compiled. I'm just trying to think if does anybody else have anything that they want to add before we jump into the guts of this. I know that this can be a little bit tedious, and so I'm trying to be respectful of everybody's time as well.
So is this where I asked the question about changing the first percentage?
Sure, go right ahead.
Well, as you can see on the side note, Kurt Melcher identified 85 to 90% of commercial clam harvest coming out of Tillamook Bay. So I would like to change the 70%, more than 70%, to more than 85%.
And we wanted to see, does anybody have any objections to that? And I made a note here that it's written here as well, also in our Appendix C, so I can make those changes in both places. Would that be a concern? Does anybody have any data to the contrary that it's not 85% or more?
Well, I'd have to say that considering we can't even harvest in some bays, that you can just discount those bays, and that it's kind of a wording thing that's almost got a kind of a political agenda drive to it, the way it's worded.
The reason I want to
not
go with the higher number is so we can ensure we have adequate surveys.
I see what you're saying, Barbara. Because it does support more than, you're right. It does support more than 85%, but it in that statement says that it implies the other bays we're capable of working in all of them. It doesn't imply that there's only a few bays where harvest is being done, and that it sounds kind of like, oh well, too much work's being done in Tillamook Bay when it's yet a potential sustainable fishery, depending on the data we get back. But the other bays that have no harvest in them at all, it just makes it sound like there's harvest in every bay, but Tillamook has some overly harvested problem.
Well, I just want it to be accurate, and more than 85 to 90% comes out of Tillamook Bay. So
Yeah.
I'm just looking for a more accurate number.
Okay, I see your point.
If you guys are okay with that, I'll make that change. That's easy enough.
Thank you.
Yep. And Craig, if you have some language that you want me to add, please send it to me and just let me know. I put this both in a Word version or in a Google shared Google Doc version, whichever is more convenient for everybody.
I believe I read in this version, or maybe it was the Department of Fish and Wildlife version, or that you took some of this from, that it only 3 bays are mentioned. I think it was Coos and Yaquina and Tillamook Bay. I think, weren't those listed specifically somewhere inside this report?
It would have been in Appendix C.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just flat out cut and paste from those backgrounders that ODFW provided to the group.
Yeah.
And so this is not, that's one of the reasons why I'm not really that worried about anybody making changes here. I don't have any ownership in this. This was strictly a cut and paste.
Well, I think you did a great job, Christy. Anyway, so so Craig, if you see something up there that you think needs to be pushed up in there out of Appendix C, I would encourage you to write that into Christy then.
I might remind everyone as we look at this review, remember who this is for.
Mm-hmm.
It's important that we be accurate, but if we get way too far into the details, the people reading it, then it loses something depending upon who's using it. So we want to be accurate, but as straightforward and simple as we can to get the point across. And I realize there's a fine line for that, but as you write one of these things, I think the simple and straightforward is important because the people reading it are going to need it that way in order to help us make decisions down the road or help the department make decisions down the road.
Okay, are we relatively good with this? Sorry, I'm scrolling, this overview of the Shellfish program? Hopefully everybody's had a chance to look through it.
Yes, I'm supportive.
I am too.
Okay, then certainly we're not done yet, so you don't have to make, if you come up with anything you want to have changed after this meeting, please feel free to send it to me. But my goal again is to submit this to ODFW in enough time for them to turn it around and submit it as they are required to do as well. I'm hoping to have this completed by the end of this month. Okay, so the next section then is the Tillamook Bay Advisory Committee. And this is, again, going from our mandate that came about from Senate Bill 1025. So we had a purpose of fourfold. I didn't make up any of this language, just came right out of there. And then we had 5 issues that we were supposed to discuss. And so everything that I have following this is in this particular order. And I made mention here that because of COVID, the results or the survey was delayed. So I'm hoping that this is enough information to talk about that. But again, if you want to add more or you think it's important that we add more about the delay, then I'm fine with adding that as well. Does anybody want to make any changes to these?
Christy, can you go up just where the header of designated areas of recreational clamming so I can take a look? Where did that?
Is this where you want to see, or do you need me to go further?
I'm going, let's see, I'm looking at my screen, going down, proceeding further into the report. Keep
Okay.
going right there.
Okay, perfect. So here is now the summary of our interim recommendations. And this is more of my writing because I was going back and listening to all of the meetings and reading the notes and stuff. So I did a lot of consolidation and I might have missed things. I might have overstated or understated something. So please, this is the part where we need to pay the most attention to because these are our interim recommendations. And I'm happy to get your feedback. I think this is everything for the ghost hole and the user conflict. Did anybody have any changes here?
I have a question, third bullet, Christy. To publish a recommendation related to safety buffers in the vicinity of the divers. And then you have an example, California and Washington, 200-foot safety buffers from diver down flags. Do you have any idea of what the recommendation is going to be from the Marine Board?
Does anybody else have an answer to that? I don't have an answer to that.
Christy, you may be able to just restructure that third bullet, the very first part, to recommend to OSMB a safety buffer, or recommend OSB establish a safety buffer.
Recommend to to establish a safety buffer?
Yes.
Of 200 feet or 50 meters of, 50 meters is international law, and they should uphold to that.
That was one thing that I wasn't sure of, because when I listened to all of the talks or all of the recordings of the meetings, I didn't hear that we agreed on a distance. And I just have this as an example, but if the group can agree on a distance, or if you want to agree on a range.
I don't think that's the group's responsibility or liability. I
Okay.
think that is the liability of the international flag of law, that a dive flag, the alpha, blue, and white flag stands for. I don't
Mhm.
think we have the right as a board to even come up with such a number.
Okay, then this generic sentence is okay with you?
I think they should just to international standards.
Okay, well, Christie, this went from being just a recommendation to now establish a safety buffer.
Mhm.
My concern, I'll voice it, is that that's a very small area.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get safety buffers, if you put 5 dive boats in there and you start putting safety buffers on, you're going to effectively close the whole area and cause real conflict. So
people don't have a lot of blood in their veins.
Okay,
People
hold on.
don't have a lot
Let me
of blood
finish
in
my
their veins
comment,
to be
Craig.
bled
So
out
before
by
you
a
dive
prop.
in,
Hold on,
let me finish
Craig.
my comment.
Yeah, let Steve finish.
Yeah, let me finish. So I'm supportive of recommending to people that they observe, give them some kind of an idea of what they ought to be considering. But I would hate to see an administrative rule of some kind through the Marine Board or otherwise come up with a new set of, a new administrative rule that starts causing more conflict than we're trying to resolve. That's really all I'm trying to avoid. So the way you had it originally written was, to come up with recommendations or suggestions. And I think that's the most appropriate, rather than to establish, because to establish in my mind means that you have to adopt an administrative rule. And I think that would cause more conflict in the end of the day than it would solve.
As I recall, OSP agreed that a buffer at one of the meetings would be put up, established, and that we would and that was, like I said, it's not our decision to decide what a safety buffer is. I don't think that's the liability of this board. That should just read right there. Oregon State Marine Board to put to establish the same thing as international law, a 50-meter limit from boats. If they do not, then the lawyer that I already have in my retainment will be looking at making this a situation, because it's not in our place to decide whether some salmon fishermen can go drive by a dive flag because they want to go catch some fish, because they got their feelings hurt that they have to drive around our boat because we're working. It's ridiculous. We need to have an established rule on that follows international law. I don't think it's in our position to decide anything different.
Well, my question is then on that bullet, could it just read OSMB to recommend a safety buffer? And if that change does go into the language goes into effect, will they do that? Will they recommend a buffer, whatever that's going to be?
One way that this could work is recommend to OSB to consider a safety buffer. My recollection is that when Josh Mulholland was with us talking about this, he was going through the process that would be required to bring a proposal to the Oregon State Marine Board and make the case, but it was their consideration. So he couldn't promise that would occur because that's beyond his his authority. But I think he said he could bring it to their consideration.
So I've typed in 3 different verbs here. Does
Yes.
anybody have a preference for any one of those?
Yeah, establish. Establish a safety buffer in accordance to international law so that when some sailboat comes sailing in our bay from somewhere else, they actually have a clue what's going on in Oregon instead of a bunch of people in Oregon deciding what's going on when they don't have the right to. Because they want to go catch a salmon and risk somebody's life in doing so.
If I could make a comment as well on this, this is all pertaining to the ghost hole and the fall salmon fishery. Mitch stated earlier, we're already at 150,000 pounds of the butter quota. We will probably more likely than not be done with this mid-August. So by the time that we get the big influx of salmon fishermen coming September and October, that whole problem will have been nullified. No one will be diving in the ghost hole at that point in time. So just a heads up on that. I know we're putting a lot of effort into this buffer, but this is all because of the ghost hole and the conflict between the two. That fall conflict should be done. I mean, we might be done with the butters here in the next 45 days. So
Thank you, but we were tasked with doing this, so we have to come up with our recommendations, and this is something that the committee has talked about, and this was a recommendation, so we need to have this in here. Just it's a matter of what wording do we want to use.
I think we use establish.
How about we use consider establishing a safety buffer?
No, because considering is definitely an out. I don't think that there's like I said, there's going to be somebody that comes into port from somewhere else. And this isn't going to just affect the ghost hole, like Levi said. And granted, we might be well done before fall salmon season and there won't be a conflict. But when we're diving over by the other parts of the channel and some boat comes in here, if we don't have international and normal standards that people haven't, that's a safety reason. There's a reason behind that. There's, and in reality, it should read an alpha flag flying on there for the standard, because that's the blue and white flag that most people don't recognize, but that's the actual international dive flag standard. The red and white flag that most people are aware of is a dive flag that's just considered the most common in the regular dive industry and to boaters, but can be considered but the reason that's not the dive international flag is because it can be considered from a long distance away as a distress flag. So there's a reason for the international dive blue and white alpha flag as being our dive standard of 1 meter. Anyway,
don't we have a 100-foot safety buffer in Oregon now?
No, it just says to drive by whoever's diving slowly and hope you don't hit them with your prop. Kind of basically is what it says. It doesn't say the last part, but might as well. There
is no safety buffer at all?
No, it says when you see a dive flag, as I recall in the thing, when you see a dive flag, divers in the area approach and proceed through the area with caution, which is common sense, but that doesn't stop somebody from driving up to my boat and say, hey, are you gill netting? It's like, no, it's not a gill net out behind, it's dive hoses that you're going to run over and kill somebody, so you wouldn't believe how many times I've had people not aware that what they're doing because of lack of education on whether it's they're just out for the weekend from somewhere, but when it comes to other people coming into port and we're diving along the edges of the channel, there are people that are going to come in here that don't aren't just here to salmon fish. This isn't about just the salmon fishermen and keeping them from driving over us. It's about everybody. If we just focus on it about the ghost hole and make some rule up about that, then the rest of the bay is effectively not being managed properly. And
Okay,
that's why
so
they
what
have
if we
international laws.
say to establish an effective or appropriate safety buffer in the vicinity of diving operations in the ghost hole and any other area based on safe boating guidelines for confined water, blah, 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 you know that. How's that sound? And every other,
I like it.
I'd say and every other area, not any
Sorry.
other.
Sorry.
Yeah, I thought there was one. It just wasn't as big as in other areas.
Can we get consensus on this language from the committee? Anybody?
Is it necessary to have the in accordance with international law there then, if that's the case?
If you want to keep from liability, yes.
Well, we're only
Well-
making recommendations. We're not making law rules. So
Well, but Oregon, you should at least let the people that are going to make this rule from our recommendation know that we're not the ones telling them to do something that's not in accordance to what should be common sense and international law. We
Okay, well,
shouldn't give them a
maybe
reason to think something differently.
maybe it's the international law that's the 100-foot and that California and Washington have 200 feet.
It's 50 meters. That's international law. 50 meters. They don't go by feet.
Okay, what's 50 meters?
150 feet.
Okay. Thank
See,
you. I'm
you
not,
know why? And you know why California and Washington went 200? Because they were playing a little safety net on their liability.
Mhm. Okay. Is this okay with the group then?
That looks fine to me. Looks better than it did for sure.
Greg,
Yeah, that looks good to me too.
Good to me.
what's your heartburn about? Do you have any heartburn about deleting in accordance with international law? To Steve's question as well.
What's wrong with it?
I guess that's what he was
Since
asking
it's-
to Steve. Steve Williams, is this okay with you then?
I can live with it. Basically when you say in accordance with international law, and you lead with establish an appropriate safety buffer, whoever's doing it, they don't have any decision to make if it's in accordance with international law. I was looking for an honest discussion by the Oregon State Marine Board about what's necessary in some of these small estuaries and bays. The international law is, they're going to look at that anyway as part of the whole thing. I guess it doesn't matter if you put it there, but your statement limits their ability to look at options.
Should we say then that meets or exceeds rather than in accordance?
Well, we're going.
I don't know what, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to leave it the way it is. I'm not going to waste any more time worrying about it. I think it's the Oregon State Marine Board has to make these kinds of decisions. We're recommending that they take a look at it and we go from there. I mean, that's about all we can do, I guess, at this point.
I think it's fine.
Okay. Again, we're trying to come to consensus, so there's going to be no perfect language, I don't think, but as long as we all kind of agree on the general language, that's fantastic. Anything else for this section?
I think if you're worried about getting cut off there a little short or too long there, Steve, you actually might have asked to remove the 200-foot safety buffer California suggestion that's going against what you want, as opposed to international law, it's 150 feet. So I think
I
that
thought about that as well, but I think we put enough time.
I think it's important that they step over to a higher. I'm not suggesting taking it off. I'm just saying
Okay.
that right there should have been more of an argument than just wanting international law taken off of there.
We'll just assume that the Marine Board can do their job based on our recommendation.
Okay. Anything else for Ghost Hole? Okay. I'm gonna scroll down. Go ahead.
One thing I would suggest in there is that they put, and this is for butter clams in particularly, individual quotas on our permits, because that would, there's in a sense, Levi's saying this is all over when it's over. But as an industry, we need to have individual and not have these derby fisheries, which is something that I'd wanted to talk about a lot in the past. We never really got there with these derby fisheries and figuring out how to go to individual quotas, which would benefit the food industry. It would fit all the fishermen from and it would cause a lot less conflict in a lot of ways. It would be easier to be managed because there would be individual quotas on each permit, and it wouldn't be a derby where some Mitch or somebody has to do this big giant last minute add up and then either cut us short or go over, which seems to be one of the topics at all these meetings, or whether how we go over or under. So I would definitely say one of my big recommendations for that was totally overlooked this entire time since meeting 2 or 3 is individual quotas on these clams, and that if we're going to go to all this trouble to have these rules about stuff when we're not even going to be there for half of the season potentially from now on, if the industry keeps doing what it is, but the way the industry is, it does not allow for the ODA that is being paid for to actually have that much jurisdiction in our fishery, because it's shut down half the year. It also doesn't allow any industry growth for food grade stuff when we have these derby fisheries. And so I think that needs to be something that we need to have maybe a lot more conversation about and add that to this for the ghost hole in the long run before this gets put in the final. I really believe that we need, and maybe even a portion of the quotas, if it can't be that we can't get rid of these derbies the way they are. But I believe that's one of the biggest conflict problems that there are over any of it is the derby fishery, and when that causes us to have to be there in your way, Steve. That causes us to potentially have to be in somebody working against the other people. It's something that has to be addressed at these meetings, or I don't see any point in them as far as from a commercial standpoint of this making it for its about sustainability.
I have that on our list. It's not in here because we haven't discussed it to consensus yet, but this is just the interim report. This is not the final report, and we haven't lost sight of that yet. All that I've written in here are the things that we've come to consensus on. And so this is a slightly longer than midway report, but the final report won't come out until we're done next year. So I agree with you, but maybe I can show you a little bit later that's still listed on the things that we're going to talk about. It's actually in Appendix A or B, I'm not sure which one it is, but our list of high priority topics are still in here. These are just the things we've come to consensus on.
Okay, I think I did, but I think that all of those do hinge a little bit upon what I was talking about as far as that goes. So
they won't be lost. Yeah, they won't be lost.
Good.
The next section was Secor stock assessments. Going through these were the ones that I was able to pull from our meetings and all of that of what we've agreed on One thing that I added that I wanted your input in for sure, in addition to everything else, is that we didn't put a timeline in here. We said that we wanted we wanted more funding to ODFW so that they could do more Secor surveys, but we didn't say the frequency. And so this was my best guess of what would be. I mean, it's at least double, but I don't know. Certainly every year, I don't know that Tony could practically do that. So if you guys want to suggest a different time frame or a time range, that's fine too.
I say every 2 years. I don't know what it would take, but I think that, like I was saying earlier, you need to have the same. You need to have data on even 1 square yard of like their data points in the same spot multiple times a year, and you can't just skip a year or 5 years. That bait changes way too much to have an idea what's going on out there. If you go, I think much more than 2 years. The amount of change that I've witnessed out there in 3 years can be phenomena where clams will either be or not be in places, and different trends. So every 5 years would just be such a fine. I mean, it'd be too just spread out from being able to tell really what's going on. You'd need at least a minimum of 2 years, I think. So,
Can Tony give us what he considers to be a reasonable time frame from a biological perspective? Because I think that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that every 5 years is probably the most realistic. I think anything more frequent than that will be a very large ask, funding wise.
And I think it takes 2 years to do it and then several years to process all the information. So you would be continually testing if you did it every 2 years.
Yeah.
We would essentially be asking for dedicated people to keep doing this, right? How big do we want to ask?
Every 5 years.
I support every 5 years.
So do I.
Any other changes in this section?
So let me ask the question again. You asked on a biological standpoint, how would the survey look every 5 years? And Tony, you answered on a funding standpoint. From a biological standpoint, on your perspective of the changes in the bay, although you haven't been out as much as we have on a continual basis, on a biological standpoint, working in the same areas, what do you think that would be, considering our harvest, all the things that go on in the period of 5 years can change in the industry?
Yeah, Craig, that's a great question. I think that it's not the easiest one to answer, but because if you're talking about, for example, cockles, then maybe something shorter would be a more appropriate time frame for the biology of cockles. But for other species like gapers and butters, 5 to 10 years is sufficient based on the age and the time to reproduction. And so I think that the 5 years is a good number in general for the clams out there, but might be a little long for a species such as cockles.
That was almost exactly what I wanted you to say. Point out that it's not all the same, and that the cockles probably are something that almost needs to be surveyed on a year-to-year basis as opposed to even 2 years. So I agree, 5 years, 4 years for gapers because of the way they set themselves in and grow. But the clams that move so much, and the butters and stuff that move under the sand, there's a lot of more biological stuff going on with them, and potentially targeting of them on the flats and stuff. So I think that the cockles need to you could have a criteria set for the different crimes as opposed to just 5 years in the end of our assessment survey recommendations for the future.
It seems to me that if we could look at the commercial take tickets and incorporate those into the monitoring effort and figure out how to make that happen, which is one of our recommendations. I know that we still haven't come to, it hasn't anyway, still working on. I think that would actually maybe fill in the gaps in between the 5 years, because that's pretty aggressive to go every year, every 2 years, especially when it takes 2 years to do a survey. But anyway, I see the value of that, but I think we could probably get a lot of value out of the commercial take, and the amount of time it took to get those cockles every year. I forgot what you guys call it, but the take per hour or whatever it is, the man hour spent in taking a certain amount. It seems like that'd be incredibly valuable in knowing what recruitment is happening.
I think that's a great observation, Claire. I think that's the way you accomplish this in the interim, is to get some more effort to rely on that kind of information to help you in those interim years. Recognizing also that there are other places in the state that I think the Secor program needs to operate. There are other, they're not maybe commercially important spots, but there's certainly sampling that needs to be done in other estuaries up and down the Oregon coast as well. So you're only realistically going to get so much money. And I think what you just described there is a good way to, in the interim, come up with the information, particularly if we spend a little more time looking at that data. There may be something there that we find that's even more helpful. So I appreciate what you just said there, and I would certainly support where we're headed with this statement.
Does this statement that I've highlighted right here take that into account, or do we need to put it somewhere else?
Well, that's pretty straightforward from my perspective. That's exactly what we were trying to do for more complete population estimates, and that can both be for the current year's estimates with Secor and in the interim. It fits for the interim as well. So it's a very straightforward statement.
Go for it,
I
Greg.
think it'd be good to add a point there to potentially on the expand the survey area to include sow and pigs. I mean, since we're asking the state for things, and there's a lot of new technology out there, ROVs and stuff like that, that Secor could use to mitigate problems with their divers in some of the areas that are dangerous. But to ask the state for not just the suggested survey areas that are already, commercial, but also areas adjacent into the ocean and stuff like that. I mean, it would not hurt to have an overall bigger picture of what's going on out there. And since we're asking, I mean, as a separate, or as to expand the survey, capability of Secor, it wouldn't hurt to ask for, additional funding for some other areas that are not necessarily where we're working. So that way have a bigger understanding of, clams overall in the adjacent waters and other bays.
So is there something specific you want me to add here? Do you have specific language? We're here now, right?
Sow and pigs, as well as, as well as areas adjacent to the bay and the ocean. But maybe you put that as a whole separate ask, as opposed to in that one, because you got that one worded really, really good. I wouldn't mess it up, but say provide additional funding for either assessing or doing research as far as collecting data in areas outside of Tillamook Bay. Just say that, because that'll cover all your bays, all the ocean.
But
They
remember,
don't
it
have
was
to
pointed out
accept it.
to us that all of the Secor funds come from recreational. So if we want to expand it to be commercial areas that they're surveying, then we'll need to get some buy-in from the commercial industry as far as putting money into it.
but they're doing it for sport, and sport is the overall big picture of the ocean, along the jetties, everywhere in the bay other than the commercial. And so if they're, since there's this, why would they want to focus on harvesting our doing their survey only on our commercial areas then? If it's provided by the sports, it should be us providing it to do our
Well,
commercial.
the areas they're looking at are where the commercial and the sport intersect mainly.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe the state should come up with another way of funding Secor besides off of licensing, because I think that's stupid anyway. I think they should just, there should be grant money to be handed out instead of relying on selling licenses to go get, for people to go get clams, and then worry about how many people are getting clams with that.
I'm just telling you where the funding source is coming from. I'm not gonna debate the, logic or.
Then can we put a PowerPoint on there for the state to consider other ways to funding Secor?
Sorry.
I think that only works, Craig, if you've got a really good suggestion about where you might go look for those funding sources. And that's a much broader discussion than we've had at the table here. Everybody's always looking for funding, but when you make that recommendation in a report like this, you have to have some pretty good guidance to give these guys some direction of where they want to go look. And I think that could be a challenge right now. So.
Is that something we want to talk about in the future outside for the final report, but maybe not this report? Since we haven't had.
We certainly could. We'd have to have some people help us with what the options might be, but I wouldn't be opposed to having that discussion.
So I have a suggestion for you guys, and it actually brings back to the logbooks and what you guys were talking about with the initial harvests and whatnot. Why aren't we looking at funding for putting that into an algorithm-based system where those logbooks are electronic? They're within the 24 hours or basically within the landing of it. And why aren't we tying in that information into Secor? You can go out, they put a coordinate where they dive. They give you the amount of pounds, their estimated take, and how quickly they took the poundage. And I don't understand why Secor isn't working back with those logbooks at this point in time to either re-verify what was taken. But you want going to talk about 5-year gaps, all your data is right there in those logbooks. I went down, I produced 1,000 pounds in 3 hours. Okay, well, that's X amount of pounds per hour on that location, instantaneously reported, going back into a computer system, sorted, filed, and boom, there is a dive point right there. That dive point is X color because it was, you produced 300 plus pounds an hour of cockles at that point. And I don't understand why why you guys aren't building that data system at this point in time.
If I'm not mistaken, that might be on one of our still to talk about list. And when we get down there, we can make sure. This again is just stuff that we've already talked about.
Gotcha, no problem.
Yep. Anything else for Secor at this time, just for the interim report?
Are they still working on the jetty, or is that done now? I got the impression that they were done now for a long time, that they were only doing that little portion that they did this year.
I think it just finished, but I haven't looked at it lately. Does anybody else know?
Out there last week, and it looked like they were finished. All their equipment was out of there, but I think they're going to work on the south jetty in the not too far distant future.
Okay.
So my comment or my thought is if we're going to have Secor go look at that, they actually have to get some pre-data, pre-project data collected before they can collect post-project data to and come up with any conclusion of anything. So that's this bullet right here is talking about that, and it seems like there needs to be some pre-project data done before post-project.
I agree with that.
And I don't know, it sounds like Tony's already kind of got his job sewed up for next year already with hours and stuff, but I don't know where that fits for you, Tony, but if this is something we recommend, it seems like something that needs to somehow be consistent with what we're trying to do, which is look at the effective jetty work.
So, I mean, is it possible that there can be some sort of a contract or some sort of a grant given to, you know, me or one of these other climbers out there? I've got an ROV. I just spent a week with Search Incorporated out doing, you know, some high tech stuff in the ocean with millions and millions of dollars worth of equipment. And I did a bunch of ROV work. That's what I was saying, you know, as far as, you know, being able to do some survey offshore and mitigate your chance with having problems with your divers. The technology's changing, it's getting cheaper. I mean, you can Secor could have an ROV for, you know, a really good working one that go down for, you know, as cheap as $3,700, and be able to go out and do some pre-survey work along the jetties and stuff like that on a pretty, you know, quick setup, you know, type of situation if that was set up to be done, Claire.
Yeah, I wonder what Tony's thinking about all this.
Yeah, obviously time-wise, we don't have something that we can fit in the near term, but I know that for previous types of constructions, less jetty work, since that's more Army Corps federal base. But I know that for other projects, for example, when the NOAA Mach P docks were built in Yaquina Bay, that there was a build-in to kind of the state's mitigation to kind of be able to have some pre and post construction work specifically on clam populations in those areas. And then that was something that we worked with a contractor to do that type of work. So those are things that are possible. I would say it's much harder to do without developing some type of collaboration with the Army Corps on how that would happen. But it is, you know, that type of work is something that has been done before.
Christy, from my perspective, this work is work that would be nice to have. Certainly from my perspective, the priorities are those areas where we have recreational and commercial harvest occurring, you know, side by side or adjacent to each other in the same areas. That's my first priority. And given Tony's description to us about his workload, this would be good work to do, but I would certainly prioritize in my own mind the work that's already ongoing in those joint harvest areas before I'd move into some of these kinds of areas. So if you want to write this, you know, when possible or if practical, that might work for me. But at this point in time, I would emphasize our work in those areas where we are co-occurring in both recreational and commercial harvest.
So I have a question, another biology question for Tony then. The recruitment of cockles, is that from an ocean perspective, from an ocean, setting, or is that just purely within the bay? Or does that tie into this particular topic or not even, doesn't tie in really?
An excellent question, Claire. We don't really know.
Okay.
We know that the larval life histories are relatively short for many of the bay clams relative to other invertebrates in Oregon estuaries, but we still do not know like where how long they spend in the coastal ocean and whether the same estuary is essentially the source for the next generation of clams or whether it's a mix among different estuaries, you know. we don't have any of the genetic or other types of studies that would indicate where the sources for that next generation of clams are coming from.
Yeah, it seems like that'd be really important to know. And I understand it's, as you were saying, Steve, that it's not directly tied to the harvest as far as what we know right now. But I would still like to see something left in here, even if it's to consider funding. Put something in here, because I think this might be something we definitely want to know at some point in the future, to know where those clams are coming from and what role the ocean's playing in putting those in. And
yeah, I do not have a problem at all with leaving something in that indicates, when practical, or if possible, secure funding to conduct pre and post construction surveys. I think it would be good information to have, but it in my mind was more of a priority to do those joint areas. So I don't have any problem leaving it in at all, Claire, if we just couch it so that it isn't a have to, given both the funding and the workload that Tony already has.
So if I
Christie,
And
choose,
again, these are just
Christie,
recommendations. So.
Christie, I would just put in front of that, get rid of the consider, but if possible, or if funding is, provided, somewhere like if possible, provide funding to, just if possible, something along those lines.
okay, does this meet everybody's concerns? Or is, oops, no?
Certainly, I can live with that.
yeah,
Yep.
Great.
I had one question, speaking of surveys, and Christy and I emailed on this. In one of our past ones, we were told that Tillamook is one of the top 3 bays for recreational harvest. I want to know what is, where does it rank in those top 3? Which is the biggest bay for recreational harvest?
Rich, do you have an idea offhand?
I was looking around, and sadly my office has moved again and I don't have those reports with me, but if I look back at that clam report, I can get those overall harvest estimates, and I'll send that out to the group.
just personal experience and seeing people out there, I would say Netarts is number 1.
Okay, well, it would help us when we're asking for every 5 years of surveys, if we could say, hey, we're number 1 for commercial and we're number 1, 2, 3, whatever for recreation. That's all I was thinking.
Right.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Steve
Yeah.
Burnell here. I do have that sense here, Barbara. That's a good question. And it varies, of course, by species. So Coos Bay is the greatest harvest of gaper clams. Second is Netarts, and third is Tillamook. Fourth is Yaquina for recreational harvest. For butter clams, same kind of pattern: Coos Bay, Netarts, Tillamook, then Yaquina. But for cockles is Netarts first, Tillamook second, Yaquina third, and Coos fourth. So it varies by species.
But it would be fair to say that Tillamook is second or third
Yes.
in recreational clam species harvest.
Yes.
So, when we're asking for more assessments, I think it'd be nice to add that in.
Yeah.
Good, very good point.
All right, let me try to get that real quick so that I just remember where to put it. Sorry, look, top to 3 recreational harvest locations.
Okay, so Tillamook Bay is in the top, Tillamook Bay recreational clamming is in the top, is either second or third for all clam species harvested.
Okay, something like this, something to this effect. Maybe you can help me wordsmith this a little bit more.
Yeah, we can provide that actual language from our records once Mitch and I have a chance to dig through those to find that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so I will put in here a comment. Great, thank you. Otherwise, are we good for the Secor? All right, going on for right now. The designated area for recreational clamming, I have this highlighted in green because we have not been able to talk about this yet. We were waiting on some Secor data. And so when I spoke with Steve and Mitch earlier this week, they said for this interim report, it's actually okay to say that the committee will be discussing this and taking into consideration the updated Secor data. So we don't need to give any comments on it just yet because we haven't really come to any consensus on anything. And is that okay with the group? For just want to make sure the group understands that and is okay with taking that route for this report.
Yep.
Yep.
Yes,
Okay, so I will add that. I will make that sound a little bit better. Then, sorry, just let me scroll down. So we've got these two sections left, but we're running kind of out of time. So I just wanted to do a time check with everybody and see if we want to keep going like we are. Maybe spend 5 minutes on this and 5 minutes on this. And then we would hopefully be close to being done with reviewing the report, knowing that you'll have maybe another 2 weeks or so to take a look at it on your own time. Does that sound okay, or any other suggestions?
Okay.
Fine with me.
Christie, one question with regard to further review by all the members, which I think is a good thing. How will you deal with a final review from everybody? You're going to want to sign off from everybody. How do you want to deal with that? If you're going to get more comments from here on out.
What I'd prefer, and it just depends on everybody's computer technology and capabilities. I'd prefer to do it by a shared Google Doc so that we can track the changes that are happening. People can comment off to the side whether they agree or disagree. That works for me. Or if that doesn't work because just of your technology or whatever, I can just send out this slightly adjusted Word doc. Everybody can bring it back to me on within 2 weeks, and then I can have the final document go out, and we can all we can do an electronic vote on it, or we can have another meeting on it. What is the pleasure of the group?
You give us a date, I think, that we want to that you want the information back, and we can indicate our support or lack thereof, depending upon how we feel about it. But you give us a date, and I think we can work with that. That'd be how I'd suggest we do it. Back to you by X.
Yeah. Anybody else have any suggestions?
That sounds good. And then if they don't comment, then, silence is consent.
Yeah. We can do that. Would 2 weeks be enough time for everybody to take a look at it with a little finer tooth comb?
Yeah, certainly.
Yes.
Okay.
Probably not, because I have the next 2 or 3 weeks of every single day trying to work because of the quota system.
Okay. Would 3 weeks be okay?
That depends on the quota system.
Have you had a chance to look at it much at all yet, Craig?
I haven't had time to hardly breathe in the
Okay.
last month.
No, that's understandable. Okay. I guess the question goes back then to Steve Romerl and Mitch. What is our absolute drop dead date that we have to give this to you? And then I can backtrack from there.
Well, I think, oh, can you hear me? Yeah, Steve here. So I think that we would really like to have that report. I'm looking back through our notes. Tibcock should give that to us by September or October of 2022 is the drop dead. So we're in
Okay.
pretty good shape. Yep.
So how about a full month to review this? Does that, because then I still need to make the changes and then we still need to come to final consensus. Would a full month be okay?
Yeah, there should be time in the end.
Okay, that's great because, you know, I'm squeezing this in too. So we would say by August 1st, then we would ask for everybody to take a look at it.
I would suggest then, Christy, if we're going to go out a full month, how do people feel about a very short Zoom meeting to do a final review of the whole thing? Get an hour, no more than that. We've gone through a lot of it here today.
Mhm.
At the end of that, you put it together at the end of it, August, one hour to review it. And we've all looked at it overall, and that way it's fairly simple. Is that reasonable?
I think so.
Okay with me.
Works for me.
Sounds good.
Okay. So we'll plan on, maybe we'll plan on a August 1st, everybody gets it back to me. Maybe we'll give me a week or so to put it together. And I will then we'll plan a Zoom meeting for, I'll send out a when to meet for the last week or so of August. How's that?
Not to exceed 1 hour.
Right. Yes, please. I know this is already pretty long. Thank you, everybody, for your attention and for your input. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Chris.
So I guess maybe maybe we can just do a really high level then, since everybody's going to have another month to look at it. Is there anything in here that's just burning you up and you want to have it changed, or knowing that you can go back and do some fine tuning wordsmithing later? Anything that we should discuss as a group? Okay, and I'm just going to say anything in this section here that we should discuss as a group before we go our own ways pretty soon. All right, I'm going to assume that you will spend more time looking at it over the next month. So then I just did want to say, here was our list of all the things that we were going to talk about. And Steve, I'm sorry, Craig, I think some of the things we're talking about, the quotas and stuff, are on here. And I think we were talking about was something in here where we were talking about coming up with new ways of building in the like building an app or doing something for the fish tickets. I think that was in here somewhere. So Steve Romerl, this was something that I think Liz created. And
Yeah,
Mitch,
so if I can help, just blow that up on there and scroll down to the bottom ones, the in progress.
Right.
There. Okay. So what we've done is we've discussed, several of these issues, and we've been checking them off and in progress, and whether they're identified by Tibcock or by the legislation. But some of the topics that we identified for our next series of meetings are these right below that in progress there. The special management areas reserved for recreational harvest only, to revisit the commercial quotas. We've had some discussion to discuss the renewal requirements and transferability of the commercial dive clam permits, to discuss potential changes to more of a limited entry permit system for commercial intertidal fishery has been a suggestion, to discuss individual fishing quotas for the commercial bay clam fishery as an alternate management system, which is that issue Craig has raised up today. Stockpiling of bay clams without a market or commercial sales, assessment of bycatch in commercial and recreational bay catch harvest, to investigate how variability in market demand may impact commercial harvest rates, and the need to conduct some type of socioeconomic assessment of the commercial bay clam fishery. All of those are topics that we identified were important for Tibcock to hold some type of discussion about and to develop a recommendation. It doesn't necessarily mean that ODFW will take that action right now, but that's your job as Tibcock, is to talk about these and to articulate a 1, 2, 3 sentence recommendation about those subjects. So those are still, on the table. We haven't, as Christie's pointed out, we haven't had an in-depth discussion about them yet.
Would you be able to find this table, Steve, and send it to me? Mitch found one, but the formatting is odd and I couldn't make it work so that I could update it.
Yes, you're looking for a Word version where we can
Yes.
switch it around. Yeah, Word table rather than a PDF or.
Yeah, I looked and looked for that and could not find that version. I'd be happy to recreate it though, because we need it editable. Yeah.
It's probably on Liz's computer that I may have access to as her supervisor. Okay. Yes, we'll find that.
So I just wanted everybody to be aware that this is included in the interim report so that it's not lost.
Yeah.
And that we are keeping track of all of those topics that we've brought up.
Yeah.
And we will have recommendations for all of these things as well in the final report.
Right.
So this was just my first try at putting together our interim report. So I really appreciate everybody's input, and I appreciate in advance your review of this over the next month. I think we're good. I'm gonna stop sharing screens now. Steve Romerl, are we good as far as the timing and the agenda go?
Yeah, I think so. We're just about right on the time there. We jumped to talk about the timeline for delivery of the Tibcock interim summary report. I'm looking at my page of notes from meeting number 7. And let me just read those to you real quick. So the actions were that Tibcock had contacted ODFW and Senator Johnson with a request to extend the timeline or the deadline of their final report. ODFW then followed up with discussions with Senator Johnson, and ODFW leadership made the decision to allow Tibcock more time to develop these recommendations in their final report. ODFW is then going to provide an interim report to the Oregon legislature in July of 2020, likely November of 2022. Yeah, 2022, as mandated by Senate Bill 1025. And Tibcock has to deliver this interim report with these preliminary recommendations to ODFW by September, October of 2022. So we're on track. We've got a real nice start towards that report. If we stick to what we just talked about in terms of finalizing this by August, that will give me just a bit of time to work with them to do what I need to do to get our report to them by November 2022. And then Tibcock will deliver their final report to ODFW in September or October of 2023. So we have a year out to finish off the remaining recommendations. And then I have to deliver the final report to the Legislative Assembly by the end of December of 2023. So those are just our notes from how that request for an extension on our time frame worked out. So we're in good shape. And I think that we'll be able to do that. Again, I don't know how much time I will have, but we'll put in our request to appear before the legislative group here pretty soon and let them know that we do have our interim report in development. So thanks for doing that. Again, hats off, Christy, for helping us through this part of the process.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
Very much so. Thank you, Christy.
Thanks for all your work, Christy.
No, thank you. We appreciate it. So I guess then the last thing we have to do is talk about what we wanted topics for next meeting.
It's gonna be that 1 hour meeting, the short review.
I would think that that's kind of like Tibcock meeting 9B or something like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would agree.
The meeting number 10, we definitely would like to get through and make sure that we talk about those topics that we've been mandated to talk about. But we want to make sure that we've got as much of the information as we possibly can. Tony, you had mentioned that there might be like the end of the year report for, or something similar for Secor. Could you maybe say a little bit more about that?
No, but I was just planning to do that and share that with the committee. And it'll probably take me like a month or so after we complete our survey to be able to put that report together, which would just give summary of the areas that we sampled, as well as an overview of the results to date for at least the year 1 of the survey.
Okay, so you're thinking maybe like end of the year or early next year we would have that?
Yes.
Okay, so does it make sense then to start the talks about the recreational usage? Because I think that was the one thing, that was the one area in green on my report that we hadn't talked about. Do we want to try to start that before we have the Secor preliminary data, or do we want to wait?
Are you referring to the special management areas? Is that the one you were? Yeah. Well, in my opinion, that's kind of that's one of the big ones in the room.
Yep.
And I think if we could get started, I realize you've got to have people are going to want the Secor data to make final decisions, but I think there's a lot we can talk about to get an understanding of the areas, what they are, where they are, how they're utilized, both sport, both recreational and commercial. It'd be good to begin that discussion, because I think that's probably it might even be a 2-meeting discussion. Get it out, get the interim stuff out of the way, then bring in the data that'll help us put it together. A plus B might equal C, maybe.
Would it be appropriate to get the Oregon Division of Lands that keeps leasing out Bay Area for commercial oyster growing involved? Because, you know, the area we're talking about keeps shrinking as they keep leasing out more Bay Area.
Merle, is that something that we could have them maybe come give us a talk about, or?
We could certainly ask that. Barbara, you're correct on that, you know, that the Oregon Department of State Lands is the landowner for these submerged and submersible lands, but it's the Oregon Department of Agriculture that handles the commercial shellfish plat leasing on behalf of the Department of State Lands. We have had the guy who is running that program, lives right there in Tillamook. That's Alex Manderson. And he has come and spoken with us before about the process and talked also about the areas of the bay where they allow commercial harvests and other areas where they don't. We could certainly ask Alex to come and talk with us more about the process that his agency goes through to issue those leases.
But is there any limit on what they're going to lease out? Because it seems like they're leasing out more and more land.
I can share with you that earlier this year, I introduced a legislative concept to require the Department of Agriculture to put together a commercial mariculture grow out plan for every bay and estuary in the state. Now, I don't know if that is going to be accepted. But at this point, Department of Agriculture doesn't have a complete grow out plan for the bays. You know, they consider each one on its merits.
But so it's unplanned development.
It's a bit frustrating, of course, to many of us who are looking at the bigger picture rather than lease by lease. Anyway, so that is something we could talk about. It isn't in our list of priorities now, but it's certainly an issue that is important to recreational cameras. As you know, those leases are leases to grow oysters and clams for commercial purposes, but they are not exclusion areas. So recreational clammers can continue to go clamming in those areas that are leased out for commercial cultivation of oysters. They're not no trespass areas.
Okay, well, I always considered them no trespass.
Yes, well, and I
We
think
might be able to find some good clams there.
yes, so that's something that, you know, is more awareness needed that's the situation.
I think maybe we already have a recommendation then for that one, is that more awareness is needed. Some sort of education campaign.
Yes.
Well, but I've run into people that are not educated, and they come back and they say, hey, you know, I got a bunch of oysters out there. I hit them in the bottom of my bucket. And I'm like, none of those oysters, you know, you are stealing from someone that put those oysters out there. You know, this isn't a free for all. So I would think would have more problems with conflicts if you had recreational, you know, clammers that thought, wow, well, how about oysters for a treat tonight? You know, as they got into those leased areas.
I took a call like that while we were in our discussion here down on the South Coast. I had to just deal with an issue exactly like that.
Well, it's an excellent question of Department of Agriculture, where, I mean, as you said, Steve, it's unplanned at this point. I don't know whether your legislative concept will fly or not, but do you think, would it do us any good to speak to this gentleman about this and voice concerns as a committee, do you believe?
Yes, I think so. I think we could ask Alex to appear before us and talk about these concerns that recreational clammers in particular are not aware that these are areas that are open, and you know, just to ask for his guidance on, you know, what he could do to help alleviate that problem.
Well, and I think it goes to the next step that Barbara originally identified, which was, you know, how many acres of oyster plats do I really need?
Yeah.
I mean, I get it, but there's a point at which maybe I got enough. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it would be good to, I'd enjoy having that discussion and the opportunity, at least voice the opinion. They would have to take it into consideration then when they start moving forward with things. At least they'd know we were aware and paying attention.
I can report that ODFW routinely provides comments on every application for a new lease. And we routinely, over my lifespan here with the agency, have commented on the overall carrying capacity and cumulative number. You know, we raise that issue up every opportunity that we can.
I know you do.
Does the group feel like we need any sort of backgrounder from ODFW other than the Secor data to have the discussion, to start the discussion about the recreational management areas?
We have discussed in the past those big maps that show both the areas and the overlaps. I saw some of them. We actually looked at some today that Tony had that had the overlaps. Those kinds of things for any kind of a larger discussion would be handy to have in a bigger format so we could all see them in a room. I'm assuming hopefully our next meeting will be able to be maybe in person, and that would be a very valuable piece of information to have up on the wall.
We can certainly provide big scale maps that would be possible to walk up and put dots on, you know, hotspot areas and those kind of things, and use Sharpie pens to draw on them, that type of deal.
Okay, great. Well, my to-do list then is to send out this slightly modified report to everybody. I'll do that through a Word document. If you guys can get it back to me then within a month, that's fantastic. And we will schedule 9B shortly thereafter. And how about, do we need to do anything else at this point?
I think I'd also like to thank Claire for offering up the boathouse, and if at all
Yes.
possible, Claire, I'd like to ask you to do that again. You know, it'd be great for us to meet in person, if at all possible.
Yeah, it'll be available.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I guess then if there's nothing else, I will go ahead and stop recording. And once it converts and downloads, then Steve Rimmerl, I will give you a link to wherever it is.
Yes, all right, thanks very much. Well, thanks everyone for a very good discussion. Again, lots of issues.